Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Tantra's Mantra, where we go behind and beyond the tech news headlines. As you may know, the cellular infrastructure business has been in the news for more than a year now for many reasons, ranging from national security to the lack of 5G supply chain diversity, possible solutions to address those issues, and so on. All of this put a lot of emphasis on something that was already happening in the industry, but at a much lower pace, I would say the network virtualization. As many would know, the core network has been fully virtualized for some time now. According to some estimates, almost 50% of the core network deployments in 2020 were expected to be fully virtualized. When you look at the radio network part, or the RAN part, the story is a little bit different. The vRAN or the virtual RAN was mostly talk and small deployments and trials here and there till very recently. But with the success of Rakuten in Japan and the emphasis of expanding 5G supply chain diversity is giving virtual RAN and open RAN a big push. Some might even call this a little bit of a market hype as well. For example, if you listen to or open any trade publication, you would not miss discussion of Open RAN and Virtual RAN for sure. To discuss the current status of virtualization and Open RAN, we have a special guest from the company that has been providing the underlying architecture and solutions for the industry. I'm talking about Intel here, and our guest is Caroline Chan, VP and GM of 5G Infrastructure Division at Intel. Caroline, welcome to Tantra's Mantra Show. Thanks for coming over.
No, thank you for having me. So you here to asking me to talk about my favorite topic. I'm all in, definitely.
Oh, perfect. So we are in for a treat then. So Intel is a very large company, and I think you've been there for a long time now, right? Could you briefly explain to our audience your journey at Intel and what specific part of the business you are currently leading?
Yeah, this is my 11th year in Intel. It's been a while. For the last 10 years, I've actually been focusing on driving network virtualization, network transformation, all the way down to the RAM business. As you said, the network as a whole, especially around the wireless piece, I've been in this business for a long time. I used to work in the system house. Used to work for a company called Nortel Networks Systems, and we've been building systems for a single purpose, which is to drive the best spectrum efficiency. 2G, 3G, 4G, and more or less being the same way. But as you could tell, Prakash, the fortune of a operator, you compare that to the people that provide the software, the applications, the clouds, the Googles, the Facebook, the Ubers, and so on. People that really live on the wireless network that's being built. But if you look at their profitability, the return of investment, it's not proportional. The more and more you see that the network, yes, it needs to provide the best spectral efficiency, but it also needs to provide the underlying compute engine to carry a lot of these applications, to share some of the revenue that's coming in, to share, to participate in the type of innovation that has been driving on top of the network. So having recognized that, Intel 10 years ago started thinking that we got to start driving the compute platform all the way down to the signal processing side for the radio SSL, which is really the last frontier. The difficulties of driving the amount of latency that you need to do signal processing, the predictability to answer to interrupt really becomes a key factor problem that we have to solve. So I've been leading a team, starting small and start driving a reference architecture, and now it become a legitimate business under execution. So we started the whole we call flex RAN, flexible RAN, and become virtual RAN. Now it's this whole O-RAN movement that really start taking place. My role now inside Intel is to leverage all of these virtualized cloud native network out there, really start taking that to the next space, which is what we can do with all these. Can we take this into enterprise? Can we drive more private networks? And can we drive more innovations on top of it? I think last earlier this week, I just gave a conversation around 5G and blockchain with our customers in India. Why does the blockchain becomes intertwined with 5G? Because the fact that 5G drives a lot of the speeds and feeds and the latency, and more so because now 5G really start entering into the enterprise. Because as you see, the public blockchain and private blockchain is still has a gap between private blockchain is the one that we see them has the most uptake. So my job's been fun, Prakash, and I've been really enjoying it. And it's really to leverage 5G to do more and drive more application, drive more innovation. So in a long way, I'm trying to answer why I love coming to work every day.
Perfect. Very nice. And that's exactly what we are going to discuss today. So, in your view, what is the current state of open RAN and virtual RAN in terms of landscape? What is the current status and where it is headed?
So as you say so eloquently at the beginning, the core network is definitely at the forefront of virtualization. We agree with you that 50% or so is being virtualized, and we fully anticipate that the percentage will go much higher. vRAN, Open RAN actually started to take hold. We just, I think you alluded to, just made an announcement with Dish early this week. We have been working with Rakuten, and even we actually have large scale discussions around the world. Verizon just made an announcement that they had a pilot on their virtualized 5G network. It's at the beginning of the journey, but it is going beyond the lab, beyond just a trial. For example, in the Rakuten case, the virtualized LTs already roll out, and in Japan, they already have a few million customers on it, and they just started kicked off their 5G network. You see them on the news. So I would say that there are few greenfield and brownfield already started. We heard Vodafone UK announce, and then also Deutsche Telekom has made an announcement earlier this year with us and VMware. We see the momentum rolling. So if I were betting person, I would say that in the next 2-3 years, you will see significant rollout started coming in as 5G spectrum becomes more widely available, as C-band, the massive MIMO, really started taking hold. I'm very confident, although we're at the beginning of the journey, but the journey will go at a much faster pace.
Okay, perfect. So I hope you brought your crystal ball today. Any forecast on when, if at all, this will be mainstream? Like, all the operators adopting it as a mainstream solution.
My crystal ball is sometimes can be broken, but I'm never shied away from making a prediction. Look, you've been in telco business as long as I have. This is a very long tail market. People don't go and rip and replace easily. Usually, new technology, new architecture gets rolled out when there are new spectrum becomes available. So I think in a large sense, it will be relying on the rapid rollout of 5G and when the spectrum become available. So I would say myself is that you see significant rollout starting in probably 2022 timeframe because we see more spectrum become available, especially around CBRS. And then the next phase will be you started to become a de facto. So meaning that OEMs around us really figure out how to put all the Lego blocks together. Remember, when you talk about Open RAN, you are talking about multiple pieces. You have to put it back together. We're still in that little, somebody had to come in and put this Lego together. In the past, for example, my old employer, Nortel, would be the one that put everything, roll out everything, be responsible for the entire network. In the future, there will be a role that come into play. You start seeing more software and hardware that's pre-integrated to come into the space and makes it a little more easier, more consumable. Given the fact that we just saw Ericsson just announced their Cloud RAN program based on Intel, when you see industry leader like Ericsson start talking about it, because that actually came out in their press release, it gives you the confidence that we have now finally coming, going through that hockey stick, right? You started coming up the little hockey stick. So I'm confident in 3, 5 years, you will see this become one of the major trend being deployed.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, especially when you look at the last holdouts like Ericsson, which was, resisting so far to talk about open and virtual RAN, they coming out, I think that is something, right? That clearly shows it's not just hype, it's, something of a trend, right?
Yeah, a trend comes from having the demand, the pull from the operator, but also have the supply chain become much more mature.
Yeah. So when we talk open and virtual RANs, we almost talk in as synonyms, but they are two different concepts as such, right? Open RAN and virtual RAN. But I think their fate is linked together. If one happens, the other happens, and vice versa. I've asked this question to a few people, but everybody has a different opinion. What do you think? Are they linked together, or do they happen parallel at the same time, or one happens, the other comes a little bit later? How are you seeing in the market?
We see virtualized RAM be essential for the open RAM because once you virtualize it, that means you separate out the software and hardware, really becomes one of the enablers for open RAM. What is open RAM? Open RAM means that you have open interfaces, you can interoperable with each other. You're not doing a single vendor delivering an entire system. So we do see that virtualized RAM is an enabler of open RAM or ORAN. At the same time, you will have the traditional rent that's in place. We don't see that going away. We still see that will continue to be rolled out because there will always be the need for that. We do see the two trend coexist. It's not one or the other, but gradually as the vRAN, Open RAN market become more mature, we'll see that being growing at a much faster pace.
Okay. Very well. There could be initially big operators are a little bit hesitant trying new things as such in a large way. Maybe they will do virtualization, for example, with a single vendor. The interfaces could be open, but not to complicate too many things at the same time. They might virtualize, go with a single vendor. Others might look at open up, have multiple vendors, but not take a traditional route. So do you see any of that happening when you talk to operators?
Oh yeah, totally, totally. I think precisely what you just described. There'll be operators who prefer to be virtualized because it desegregated the hardware and software, give them a much faster innovation cycle. They can pick and choose the cloud skill hardware platform to pair with their software vendors. But it is single vendor delivering all of it, but it's virtualized. And then on the other side, you see Dish, for example, they just announced the first ORAN compliant 5G network in the United States. You see the vendor list that they announced. It is completely open based on the ORAN spec, right? They have announced two software vendors, Mavenir and Altustar. They've announced Intel, and they've also in the same release they mentioned that they've been working with the multiple hardware OEMs, and then they announced different parts of the software being going to different vendors. So that is the ultimate ORAN spec, right? They're complying with the ORAN spec, but it takes a lot of work, and they can do it because it's a greenfield environment, and they're starting from scratch, investing tremendously into the ecosystem. So you will see that little bifurcation because the operator do take different pace to get to the same place. But ultimately, eventually, just like any new technology, it will take a few years to work out the kinks, and it will be there sooner or later. So we're confident the trend is the right trend, and we will be there in a few years.
Perfect. We'll talk about greenfield versus brownfield and what you need a little bit later. Congratulations on the Dish deal. I think that is an important development. And they picked up your FlexRAN, Xeon processors, and accelerator and networking adapter. So I think that was great for you guys for sure. And many of Open RAN networks or vRAN networks as well run on FlexRAN and your processors. Could you give us a high level view of all the things that Intel offers for virtual and Open RAN, and talk a little bit more about your recent announcement that you did few weeks ago, the newer version of FlexRAN and the accelerator and such, and that is second and third. Talked about a little bit of Dish. Any more color you could add to that? That would be great as well.
Sure. I don't want to bore everybody, so let me just up level a little bit because not everyone likes to hear all the silicon. But generally, the way that we go to market is we provide a reference design. So FlexRAN, in a nutshell, is a LTE and 5G reference software that optimize based on the Intel platform. And underneath it, we provide the CPU, we provide accelerator, FPGA and EASIC, we provide the connectivity, so like the NIC card. We also provide some the storage piece as well. So we put together a reference hardware, a reference software. We benchmark the performance for based on different call profile. We make it easier for people to consume and adopt. Uh, we provide support to our software ecosystem to optimize and commercialize our reference software together with us. They support interoperability testing with remote radio unit. We also have FPGA division. We call them Programmable System Group, PSG. They provide reference design for Open RAN compliant radio unit. So if you look at it, we really truly are the one that provides all the end-to-end portfolio for a 5G network. That just describing the vRAN piece. We all, of course, we provide data plane acceleration, DPDK. We provide the 5G core network. We actually one of the major silicon platform suppliers in 5G core. We have our Smart Edge division, which provides commercial based software that actually hosting the applications on the edge. We have OpenVINO. These are from our IoT group for edge analytics. There's actually quite a few more. I don't want to bore you, but if you look at the overall holistic portfolio, Intel goes from silicon platforms to commercial software to reference software. So really cover you from the radio to the RAN to the core, as well as allow the vertical focus software. Altogether, what we like to do is helping the ecosystem adopt the technology faster. We don't want to give you a bag of silicon, say, go build a system. We want to be there with you as you build a system, as you optimize the system. So one last thing I want to say is because I talk so much about innovation. We know that 5G requires the innovation piece. So we actually partner with T-Mobile, with Microsoft, with Dell, VMware, and MDOS to form an innovation team called 5G Open Innovation Lab up in Seattle for a very specific reason. We want to attract the developers who traditionally writes applications for the cloud and for the enterprise to adopt that for 5G, to leverage the 5G in order to the characteristics, the low latency, the high bandwidth, to develop applications. So that was kicked off, and twice a year we'll have a cohort of early to midlife startup to come through. T-Mobile provide them with a 5G network. We Intel actually committed to provide them with the resources to help them develop their applications to leverage the underlying compute platform. That has gone very, very well. I was really, really pleasantly surprised the response we get from the market space to use a lot of these startup applications. As far as our latest FlexRun software, we actually just added the release 16. We also added the time-sensitive network to this because the next step, as I mentioned, is that the 5G is going to go to verticals. When you go to verticals, go to enterprise, we need to adopt our reference software beyond just was targeting telco. We had to take some of the enterprise use cases as well.
Yeah, perfect. So, a couple of points that I want to highlight as mentioned. I think with disaggregation of software and hardware, that opens up this huge ecosystem, right? You don't have to be a $10 billion company to enter into the telecom market. So you could be a small software developer, then you have access to that market now and bring your innovations, which I think is really great. And also, you mentioned about the accelerators and such. So I saw in your recent announcement you had accelerators for FEC and others with lot of new applications, especially industrial IoT and mission critical services coming in with very low latency. Do you see more hardware accelerators being introduced wherein you're offloading or latency sensitive applications and stuff like that moved on to accelerators? Or
That's always a possibility as we constantly evaluating the market requirements as well as the competitive pressure to look at that. But at the same time, let's not forget that Intel CPU is constantly evolving. We will be adding a lot more features and functions into the CPU. We're very confident that as we evolve, the next generation Intel CPU will be able to handle many of these workloads. Accelerator is always an option that we can add in, just like we introduced in the EASIC beyond FPGA. So basically take the RTL and harden it. And that's we actually did an acquisition about 2 years ago, a company called EASIC. So that is part of our portfolio too. So we actually have many tools that we can leverage: FPGA, EASIC, putting creating new instruction set, putting some of the acceleration directly into our die. Given the wide portfolio that Intel has, I'm very confident, I should say, that we'll be able to answer to as the market requirements evolves.
okay. Perfect. So now, coming back to greenfield versus brownfield, right? For greenfield opportunities, as it's been evident through Rakuten and what Dish is doing, it's kind of pretty apparent that it makes sense for them to go start with open and virtual RAN from day one. But for brownfield operators, who have large networks to run, huge customer base that they cannot, touch the user experience and such, how cautious you think they are? What is the roadmap, if you will, they are looking at in terms of bringing vRAN and ORAN into their networks? Any views there?
And so, Prakash, you may or may not know that I'm actually sits on the tip board. On the board with Intel, there's of course Facebook, but there's also all the brownfield operator, DT, yeah, Vodafone, Telefonica, BT, so on. So we constantly have discussions on it. The interest level is actually very high. So recently, Verizon announced that they're adopting virtualized RAN, cloud native RAN into India 5G network, naming Samsung and Intel as part of the ecosystem. So that gives a very good sign that this can be done. Yes, they will be cautious. Yes, they need to make sure the user experience matches. But as they get into new spectrums, like that's why I'm very excited about CBRS. I'm very excited about the C band that's coming to auction 2021. As they get a new spectrum, there's an overlay layer that can always come in. I think which is early this week, Vodafone UK announced that they will be rolling out Open RAN, or they announced a lot of the UK markets going to go to Open RAN as they need to comply with the new rules and regulation to remove certain vendors from the network, and they will move that into Open RAN. So you do see that coming. They will have to do more testing. But absolutely, yes, in the tech level, in fact, Vodafone has gone publicly say that. DT has announced ORAN City earlier this year, that they will set up a 5G ORAN City in Germany to test this out. So I'm probably a very optimistic person in nature, but I do see the signs the point to that, and I see the technologies pointing to that. The fact that having Samsung, Nokia, Ericsson all partake in this give you the level of confidence that legacy network could be evolved and will be evolved into the open RAN space. Having said that, Intel does provide ASICs in wireless network, 4G and 5G. We continue to see that market grow because I think the market is big enough to support more than one type of deployment model.
Yeah, true. Agreed. You mentioned about private networks. I think that would be another interesting option, with CBRS spectrum and such. Basically, are using new spectrum and new use cases, new customers probably. They could try this new architectures there, get their hands dirty, get convinced themselves that they can deliver the service level and the efficiencies that are promised with open and virtual architecture, and then slowly bring that into their mainframe network, right? So I think most of the private networks, correct me if I'm wrong, would be virtual and open, at least virtual for sure, when they start doing them, right?
Yeah, we're seeing that, seeing an active discussion, especially around the private enterprise network. Because if you look at that, they serve a different audience, right? They're serving many times it's answering to the CIOs. And this, for the CIOs, IT side, cloud is imminent. I mean, that's what they deal with. They are less concerned about the radio performance than about the business results. So as to give them the business results, you cannot get away from automation. Easy to provision, right? And for them, it's really about compute and storage and manageability and automation. As we see both the type of people that bidding for CBRs, of course, you do have the Dish and the Verizon and the cable company, but you see a large number of oil and gas companies and retailers. I'm actually just recently joined the board of RCI, Rural Cloud Initiatives. We're setting up precision agriculture in North Dakota. We're setting up a greenhouse in the middle of Idaho. All of these, the connectivity becomes the means to the end, not the end. The end is to grow more vegetables, more in an organic way, and to generate a better result for our farmers and a secured food supply chain. If you look at that, the business result trumps everything else. So we started treating the communication problem as an IT problem. And that's when the cloud, the virtualization, the compute, the innovation, the application really come in. And that's why the 5G open innovation, that when we started a year and a half ago, we never thought it took off so fast. And now we're seeing the type of companies coming in to want to participate in the 5G ecosystem is way beyond what we ever imagined. The people I'm talking to now, it's like, "Who? Where did you come from?" But it does make this industry a lot more promising than it used to be a somewhat narrow ecosystem that I grew up in, right? It's funny, when I was working in Nokia, I deal with Qualcomm and I deal with, just a few limited number of people. But now you're working with people that does logistics, precision agriculture, so totally different. The car companies. So yeah, it makes my job a lot more interesting for sure.
I fully agree with you that the ecosystem expansion that has happened with 5G is enormous. And I think Open RAN and the disaggregation of software and hardware is coming at the right time as well. 5G and virtualization feed on each other and make the whole ecosystem much larger. The overall size of the pie is tremendously expanding.
Bigger. Yeah, I'm going to argue that we have to do that. If we don't do that, 5G ROI is never going to live up to its promise, right? We talked about beyond the mobile broadband. We talk about URLC, and this has to happen. Otherwise, where's the application going to come from? What do you talk about URLC to serve industry, for example? Where did the application going to come from if you don't make it open? So
Exactly. And also, I think, especially when you look at markets like India, where ARPU is so low, if you are looking to get money out of your 5G investments right from cellular services with only that ARPU, that's never going to happen. So you have to look at value added services and try to make money as an operator rather than just selling a dumb pipe, right?
yeah, and by the way, Geo does very well. Geo platform is very profitable. So there is a path to do that. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's a classic example of how you can make money even with such a low ARPU market, right?
exactly. They made more money than a lot of other companies in the high ARPU area.
Exactly. Yeah. So another related subject to that is about edge cloud, especially with your LLC, private network, a lot of on-prem systems and such happening. I think that's another major trend as well. There's so much move towards edge cloud versus centralized cloud. Of course, you need both, but there's much more happening in the edge than earlier. Before it was all on cloud, but now there's so much focus on the edge as well.
Yeah, and that's probably the next the big investment area you're gonna see. 5G investment, obviously, right now it's tremendous. People are gonna put in money and build out a network, but once the network built out, what are you gonna do with it? How are you gonna use it? Because the pervasive connectivity means that the edge becomes much closer to you. Like if you look at what AWS and Google typically they do, what 40 and 70 data centers can cover United States. But when you talk about edge, that's multiplier of that, right? So you see a lot of colo companies that are coming in, right? DataBank just made a huge announcement, made a big acquisition investment come in, and that's because the edge is ever more pushing, like truly now to the edge, over the edge. You see the investment going to colo, edge cloud, and you go into rural area. That's why we're so interested in getting into the rural cloud initiative because we do see that as the next frontier, right? What does this current crisis taught us? Healthcare needs to be going into telemedicine. Education becomes remote. AR, VR is no longer just for you to, it's more than a game. It's part of the education now. It's part of the training. So when you look at that, where does that means the cloud is ever get closer to you. So the whole edge cloud is inevitable, and they and 5G really go hand in hand together. When you have edge cloud, you need connectivity. When you have connectivity, you need the cloud to make that compute work. So I would say the future, the two are completely married together.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so another thing that we touched upon, which I said I'll come back to, is manageability of open and virtualized systems, right? I mean, if you're a new operator setting a new operation, then you basically start off, I want to keep everything open and everything virtualized with full disaggregation. You spend more time and energy and start from step one towards that, right? Which I think makes sense, which, for greenfield operators, which they are doing. Now, looking back to the brownfield opportunities, right? One consistent theme that I've heard from them on talking about these disaggregated systems is one throat to choke, right? All of these operators are accustomed, and the whole organization that they have, the skill set that they have, the kind of people that they have is built around going to one vendor, maybe multiple vendors, but if you take one market, it is one vendor, hardware, software, deployment, optimization, troubleshooting, the whole thing from one vendor. If something goes wrong, I know which throat to choke, for example, right? But when you look at this full disaggregation, you have so many vendors, everybody doing a little part of their own to make the thing happen. When you design it on paper, all of this looks perfect. Everything works from standards perspective, from open interface perspective. But being in the field, we know right the moment rubber hits the road, you start deploying, then you know there are interoperability issues, there are bugs, there are issues that need to be addressed, there are things to be better developed, better interwork, and so on, right? And then the current whole operating model is not really built to address that. How do you think this thing evolve? In my view, operators have to redefine themselves, the whole organization structure, skill set, what they want to do and what they will do based on how they want to bring this in, right? What are your some high level thoughts? I mean, it's a big subject, but I think that is a key ingredient for faster adoption, at the same time a key challenge that a lot of people are not really seeing right now.
No, maybe I take a slight different view to this, and when you see the cloud native network that we were, Dish is an example, and we've seen that now with Rakuten. The system is the network itself is automated. They actually use less network engineers than a traditional legacy network because the nature of a software driven network is automation. If you look at the server like Dell, HP, or Quanta server, they traditionally goes into the cloud in the cloud service provider side, and their server platform actually comes in with a lot of different automation software telemetries that gets exposed up. You look at what Facebook and Google does with their network. It's fully automated. So I think that degree of knowledge, the tools, actually gets brought in to the to the cloud native network. I would really suggest you, if you look at some of these the talks that the Rakuten CTO Tariq Amin has been given, he would. I read some of these, and of course, we do have a close contact. We do talk to them a lot. He really emphasized automation as the one. So instead of relying on a single vendor to provide all of the management, you relying on the tools. You relying on how the cloud is being run today. You can't say, no matter how large our wireless network is, it doesn't compare to what AWS and Google have their network. And how do they run their network? That is a lot of learnings that us on the telco side can take. So I'm optimistic. I've seen things being worked because I've been involved in the Rakuten for a while, and I see how things evolve in Dish. And and also if you look at TIP, we actually put a huge emphasis on network automation. There's a dedicated work group to solve through that. Don't forget, there's a machine learning now going into the network. There's an AI going to the network. More and more, you will see less and less manual intervention. You see more and more automation the way it should be. So I'm actually confident that we are on the right trend.
Yeah, true. So yeah, same. Looking at what Rakuten has done, what Dish is doing. So if you look at their operations versus a typical telco operator, existing telco operator, they are more working like a cloud company, and the hardware is basically kind of bare metal as such. And then all of the development, all of the value they bring is in the software side, right? So, but which means a Verizon or a AT&T running these networks will be will have to do those automation, software development. They have to be more a cloud company and a software company than what they are now, which is mostly hardware. They do a lot of software, but it's mostly hardware kind of focused company, right? They let all the complications be done by the vendors. They kind of move more on managing the stuff, right? Which is what I'm talking about. They have to transform themselves into more of a cloud company, right?
You actually see that already. If you look at both Rakuten and Dish, they've actually uh, e- reimagine themselves as a cloud company rather than a wireless company, a telco. I would say the entire industry is probably trending that way.
Yeah. So which means Verizon's and AT&T's, they basically have to transform themselves. I mean, Rakuten started that way, and Dish, because it's starting afresh, it's much easier. But I do see a challenge. I think that will decide who will win and lose. Whoever can quickly transfer themselves to this new reality will be the winner. And at the same time, now these networks are becoming like IT networks now, right? So there is a clear role for a system integrator rather than just being one vendor. This is one vendor who works across the board, brings all systems together and make it work, right? So I see emergence of this new players in telecom world, which is already in IT world right now. System integrators, these could be like the same vendors that they transform themselves to be the system integrator, not just suppliers. Or they could be existing IT established players like be it, HP, IBM, and others, basically taking this as another vertical or another industry for their system integration work and such. Do you see any movement in that sort, or what are your views? Not specifically about the companies, but the overall structure on how the networks deployed, managed, and optimized.
I definitely see that. I think because of the entire industry is transforming, because the roles and responsibility are shifting. I definitely see that. But to be honest with you, I don't know where they're gonna end up and who will be the winner in this. But I think there is a redefinition of roles in what traditionally what you do as a system house is now changing. You may be just focusing on software. You may be just you may want to provide the management services, or if you look at some of the roles at Accenture, aside Accenture and Tech Mahindra, and they might be taking on a different role as well because we are somewhere in the first phase of a reshuffling. So people probably are free and looking at, well, what chairs do I want to take? Do I want to take two chairs and three chairs rather than my traditional, this is a chair you're sitting and don't leave that. People are being moving around a little bit. So you're right. I do see that.
Okay. So I want to end with an interesting question. Feel free to address it and answer it as much as you can or as less as you can. We started the podcast with issues with one diversity in 5G infrastructure, and we addressed that. We talked about how the ecosystem itself is expanding, and there are less barriers to entry. Many big and small companies are entering the telecom ecosystem, which is great. And another related challenge was national security concern that kind of helping this as well. So with this much of expanded ecosystem, that I think will calm some of the nerves of the people who are concerned about national security and vendor diversity, right? Any view on that?
This is a topic I don't really have a strong view because this really varies from country to country. Vendor diversity is always good. A larger ecosystem is always better for any kind of market space. So I don't necessarily see how is that national security tied up. Any countries can and should want it to be self-sufficient region. So make sure that I have my own ecosystem. It's not just for security, but a lot of times it's for economic reasons and to drive innovation in my own society. We see that in US being has a pretty vibrant open RAN ecosystem. We'll see that in Europe that will come up because, like you said, now the barrier of entry is lower. People can focusing on doing software or management software or automation software. You will see many of the software vendors coming in addition to the hardware vendors benefit from it. So generally, a diverse ecosystem typically is good for the market space. Whether it's national security related or not, I'll let the politicians decide.
Okay. That's a good way to put it. And then I think the economics point that you bring is important as well. It's not just
Yeah.
security. You want to make sure,
Yeah,
yeah,
job creation, right? That's
correct.
always the concern.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have enough, not only have local vendors, but enough jobs created, and
Yeah.
and they benefit from the prosperity that technology like 5G can bring to the region.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. That was my last question. I think we covered a lot of ground. Any final comments or things that we think we missed in the discussion?
No, I don't think so. I think generally very positive about what's happening in 5G and what's happening in the network transformation space, and excited to see when 5G goes into the verticals and enterprise.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you very much for all the information and insights. Really exciting stuff. I really appreciate you coming on to Tantra's Mantra. Hope to see you back soon on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks. That's it for now. Hope it was informative and you found it to be useful. If you did, please hit that subscribe button down there. I'll be back soon with another episode, putting light on another interesting tech subject. Bye bye for now.